Right then, brethren, as we know, hopefully, the book of Revelation has a sort of story flowing through it, 21 key events, but many of those key events are covered only very, very briefly. So in the book of Revelation, we appear to have what are remarked upon as being inset chapters. So it breaks up the story flow, but in those inset chapters, we get additional information, a different perspective, extra information that helps us to understand the story flow better. And for example, at the moment, we're going through Inset Chapters 12, 13, and 14. In chapter 12, which we covered some weeks ago, we have the story of the woman and the dragon. And ultimately, the dragon chases the woman and then turns to chase and make war against those who keep the commandments of God. And then we saw in chapter 13 that the dragon cannot make war just himself. He's a spirit being, Satan, the serpent. He requires, physical human beings, a physical army, physical agents to do his bidding. So in chapter 13, we've got two beasts we've been looking at, right? The first beast we saw was empowered by the dragon. The first beast is given authority for 42 months, about 3.5 years. The first beast in Revelation 13, we looked at more closely last week, we saw was symbolized by a number of symbols that we'd previously seen in Daniel chapter 7. So there's a lion, a bear, a leopard, and 10 horns. So it's symbolic. There is no such beast with all those bits and pieces, at least I very much doubt it. But what we've got there is the beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And I suggested last week that this is a symbol of an end-time Islamic empire with 10 nations in a coalition, all right? And it's a very powerful military empire because it says in Revelation 13, the whole world worshipped the beast and said, who can make war with the beast? That sort of implies this very powerful military group of nations, all right? And when you're looking at things like the beasts or kings in the scriptures, a king is often interchangeable with his kingdom. So you've got the kingdom of Babylon or the king, Nebuchadnezzar. You have the empire of the beast, or you have the individual who heads up the empire. For that first beast in Revelation 13, which I'm suggesting is an Islamic beast of 10 nations, you've also got the person who is the head of it, the king, or the leader. Most Bible scholars tend to refer to that individual as the Antichrist, right? So the Antichrist leads up his empire, beast empire or beast as an individual. Then in Revelation 13, again last week, we looked at the second beast in Revelation, and we said there the second beast appears to be a false prophet. That's how he's named in later chapters. And the second beast is a false prophet, but also a great enforcer for the first beast. He demands that the world worships the first beast or get beheaded, get killed. And I said last week, the second beast also appears to be an Islamic beast. So what you've got in Revelation 13 is the dragons going off to make war against the commandment-keepers and others. He uses physical means to do that. Two beasts are introduced. The first beast, Antichrist. The second beast, a great false prophet, right? Now it's curious in some ways, other ways not so curious, that in Islam you have Islamic end-time prophecies. Not in this country, the UK, we don't do religion over here, as you know, but certainly in America, there's a very large number of churches who are into prophecy. So there's prophecy YouTube channels, there's prophecy TV programs. A lot of people talk about prophecy seminars. People are looking for the end of the age, for Jesus to return. Well, in Islam, there's something pretty much the same. In Islam, there are end-time prophecies. There are Islamic end-time prophecy scholars trying to figure out what the end will look like from an Islamic perspective. And strangely enough, but not that strange in some ways, there are two great leaders that Muslims are expecting at the end of the age, right? One they call their Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I, Mahdi, who will be their supreme Islamic leader in the end times, who will bring peace, well, their peace, to the world, who will bring Sharia law and Islam to all nations. Their Mahdi looks very much like the first beast, I'd have to say. In addition, they have a prophet, strangely enough, working with the Mahdi. Their prophet they call Jesus. Sometimes they refer to him as Isa, I-S-A. I think that's the Arabic form, but quite often Jesus. And their prophet Jesus works with the Mahdi and helps to enforce his rule, which looks rather like the false prophet, the second beast, right? And it seems a little bit odd, you might think, that Islam has got two leaders who look very much like the Antichrist and the false prophet, right? The problem in a sense is that, Satan knows the Bible quite well. The Muslim religion, Islam, began around about 600-ish AD. That's 500 years after the book of Revelation. So there's no question in my mind, at least, that Satan knew a reasonable amount about the scriptures, about the book of Revelation, about the dragon, about the beasts of Revelation 13, and all Satan has done is he's given Muhammad and the Muslims a twisted, reversed vision of Scripture. So now the Muslims are waiting for two great leaders, and when they arrive, the Muslims are going to accept them hook, line, and sinker. The Antichrist and the false prophet, whom they will see as two heroes of Islam. Now, I've got some slides to look at, which we'll put up for you now. And these slides have got quotations from Muslims. The quotations you'll see in the next 5 minutes or so are not taken from Christian writers. They're not from generic encyclopedias. What you'll see now are quotations from Muslim sources. So it's genuine, straight from the horse's mouth. So let's have a look at the first one. So we've got a couple of a couple of quotations here talking about the Mahdi, right? Whom I'm going to say is the first beast of Revelation 13. So this slide says here, the Mahdi will be victorious and eradicate those pigs and dogs, that's Christians and Jews, and the idols of this time, so that there will once more be a caliphate, Islamic Empire, based on prophethood, as the Hadith states. The Hadith is Islamic writings based upon Muhammad's sayings. Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule. That's the target. The Mahdi will be based in Jerusalem, and he will eradicate pigs and dogs. And he doesn't mean four-legged pigs and dogs. He means people, typically Jews and Christians. So Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi. That will abolish the leadership of the Jews, that's why they'll be run out of Judea or killed, and put an end to the domination of the Satans who spit evil into people and cause corruption in the earth, making them slaves of false idols and ruling the world by laws other than the Sharia law of the Lord of the worlds. So basically, Islamic end-time teaching says a Mahdi will come along. He will kill, destroy, or offer conversion to Jews and Christians. He'll be based in Jerusalem and will drive out the corruption caused by all these nasty sorts. So that's one. Then next one, a couple of shorter quotes. Sorry, that was quite lengthy, that one. But still talking about the Mahdi. two more quotes. The Mahdi will establish right and justice in the world and eliminate evil and corruption. He will fight against the enemies of the Muslims who would be victorious. So the Mahdi is going to conquer. He's going to bring Sharia law and Islamic truth to the whole world, and he'll kill those that get in the way. That's what most devout Muslims are expecting. They're looking for this Mahdi, right? Second quotation there. The Prophet, Muhammad, I guess, said, the Mahdi will fill the earth with equity and justice, as it was filled with oppression and tyranny. And, oh, interesting, he will rule for 7 years. That sounds like Daniel's 70th week. 7 years, in the midpoint of which the abomination of desolation is set up. So we're expecting 7 years. The Muslims are expecting 7 years. They think their Mahdi will reign for 7 years. I would say that's the first beast, right? And then the next short quotation we've got here, you can see there, a rider on a white horse. You might think, that looks like Revelation chapter 6, the first horseman of the apocalypse, and you'd be right. Only, whilst you and I might think that's the devil's work, a great deceiver going out into the world, the Muslims consider that rider to be their hero. I find the Mahdi recorded in the books of the prophets. For instance, the book of Revelation says, and I saw and beheld a white horse. He that sat on him went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, you and I think, oh, this is evil. This is the first deceiver riding out into the world. The Muslims consider that to be their hero, their savior, their Mahdi, their great conquering leader. So when you read, in the book of Revelation chapter 13 about the first beast who makes war against the saints and overcomes them, you and I think, oh, terrible. But to the Muslims it's, oh, great. Our hero Mahdi has arrived and he's killing the pigs and dogs. Those who spit Satan's stuff out, he's killing them. Hey, hallelujah. But there were two beasts in Revelation 13, the Mahdi, and the next leader, of course, is what we call the false prophet, right? Only in Islam, they're expecting a prophet, Jesus the prophet. So another slide here. Then we'll finish quoting for a little while. So a couple of quotations here. This is Islamic source material. This is not Christians writing about Muslim ideas. This is from the direct material. Jesus will descend from heaven and espouse the cause of the Mahdi. Going to work together. The Christians and the Jews will see him and recognize his true status. The Christians will abandon their faith in his Godhead. So the expectation is Christians will flock to this, I'd say, false Jesus, this false prophet, right? But the Muslims expect many to convert, to dump their traditional Christian values and come across, possibly you might be encouraged to do that by a sword pointed at your neck. Second quotation there, Jesus, the son of Mary, will soon descend among the Muslims as a just judge. He's not coming to Christians, right? This Jesus is not coming to rapture away evangelicals, born-again believers. He's coming as a just judge to dwell among Muslims. Jesus will therefore judge according to the law of Islam. All people will be required to embrace Islam, and there'll be no other alternative. Well, there will be one other alternative, that's called death or martyrdom, right? So that's interesting that the Muslims are actually looking for the Antichrist and false prophet, only because they don't see them that way. Okay, let's open our Bibles at Revelation 13, just to refresh our minds in some of this material. So Revelation 13, let's quickly review the first beast, verses 4 through 8. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" So powerful military empire. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. He was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. A great surprise. If the dragon is empowering this individual and the individual's empire, then no surprise the dragon is going to blaspheme, God in heaven, and cause his man, this Antichrist, or to the Muslims, the Mahdi, to blaspheme the God of heaven. It was granted to him, verse 7, to make war with the saints. That's where we left chapter 12. The dragon was going to make war with those that keep the commandments. This tells us exactly how he's going to do that. He's got the beast empire and its leader in his pocket, so to speak. Verse 7, it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. I'll just remind you what I said last week. There's some ambiguity about the term earth, whether it means the entire globe of 8 billion people, or whether it means the land or the region in which the prophecy is largely based. It could be either. You can go by context, but sometimes, at least to me, the context is still ambiguous. So this could be worldwide, or it could be across perhaps a huge swathe of the Middle East, North Africa, the Middle East, into Europe. I'm not clear. And as often is the case with prophecy, you won't be entirely clear ahead of time. Prophecy is great. Once it's passed, you look back at it, you can see it clearly. Oh, that's what it meant. But ahead of time, we see through a glass darkly. We have to allow for possibilities that we don't always necessarily see in detail. But for sure, when we get there, if we're around at the time, we'll know whether it's regional, across a huge part of the earth, or whether it's actually everywhere on the earth. Could be either. Okay, so that's there. Move on to the second beast, elsewhere called the false prophet. We go verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. So it may look innocent, 2 horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon, and out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The dragon is Satan, so this beast here has the heart of Satan and speaks like Satan would speak, but may look the part and can do, dramatic signs sufficient to deceive the whole world, it would seem, or the whole region. Let's read verses 14 to 15. And he, this false prophet, this beast, deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the first beast, telling those who dwell on the earth or region to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. Curious, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Right? So that's why I think I called him last week the enforcer, this second beast. And like I said a moment ago, the Muslims, 1.8 billion of them, well, I suppose some of them are devout, some are not so devout, but churchgoers, the very devout churchgoers, they're in church, 7 days a week, whatever. And others that can barely make it one day a year at Christmas. And I think Muslims would be a little bit like that. There are plenty who are radical jihadists, go out and kill, bomb, terrorize. Others that really, they're cultural Muslims. They don't have a huge amount of interest necessarily in the spiritual aspects, but they're culturally, so you have to watch out a little bit. But what you've got here is this second beast, this false prophet type of beast, is going to cause people to be killed if they don't worship the beast or its image. So we're going to look at the question of the image a little bit, and a fair amount today will be speculation. Thank you, Nebuchadnezzar, because not all is clear. Like I said a moment ago, when we get there,
you're lucky he's there to help.
When we get there, it will be clear, and at least if we know the text, the narrative, the images are in Scripture, we can say, oh, I think it's pretty clear that is this. But at the moment, sometimes we're sort of searching to try and figure out what these things might be. Now, it says here that this second beast creates an image of the beast that should both speak, an image that will speak, and you've got to worship the beast or its image. What is that all about? Well, the word image there is a Greek word, icon. They spell it E-I-K-O-N, icon. We've got the same word in English, I-C-O-N, icon. But it says here that you've got to, the image will speak, the image will have breath. You better worship the image. And if you don't, see that sword? It's going to lop your head off, right? Beheading appears to be intrinsic with these beasts, right? So the question is, what might this image of the beast be? And that's where my friend just reminded you that we're into speculation territory here. It so happens that I think I'm right in saying that the holiest icon, if I can use that word, in Islam is the Kaaba, K-A-A-B-A, the Kaaba. It's a big cube. We'll have a picture in a few moments for you to look at, but I think you're familiar with it. A great big cube that you find in Mecca. Mecca being the holiest city, right, for Muslims. And the holiest relic in the Kaaba is a black stone, like possibly a meteorite, but a black stone, right, which sits in one of the corners of the Kaaba. And all Muslims, if they're devout at least, are required to pray 5 times a day, pointing towards Mecca, towards the Kaaba, towards the black stone in the Kaaba, right? And once in their lifetime, if they're healthy, at least once in their lifetime, you can go much more often, you're supposed to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, and then you're going to have to walk around the Kaaba. And if you can, you're recommended to try and reach out and touch the black stone, or ideally kiss the black stone in the Kaaba, right? So it's a very special icon or relic. The black stone allegedly, depending on which story you read, was given by the angel Gabriel to Abraham. Although other stories have the black stone in the Garden of Eden, right? And would you believe, well, I know you believe it because I'm going to tell you, but Islamic end-time prophecy suggests that the black stone will speak at the end of time. So this image, which currently exists in Mecca, in the Kaaba, allegedly at the end of time, will be given the power of speech and also a couple of eyes, right? And will be able to intercede on your behalf if you're a good Muslim, right? You wouldn't be any use. You wouldn't be able to hear it speak. Not your behalf, might speak against you perhaps. So at the end time, the day of judgment, the day of resurrection, this black stone will speak and look at you with its eyes. But it's not difficult to see how you could actually have the black stone speaking ahead of time. Why not? It will speak at the time of judgment. It may as well speak before that for other people. So we've got a couple of slides for you to look at. So the first slide there, up in the top left, you can see the Kaaba. It's a great big cube. The word Kaaba means cube. It's covered in like a black sort of curtains material most of the time. And then the bottom left there and the top right, you can see the sort of silver which encases the black stone. The black stone, when you get close to it, doesn't look black to me, but I think from a distance it's very dark, so it's referred to as the black stone, as the name there, the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone. So that's the Kaaba. The black stone is in the corner, and you're required to pray 5 times a day towards Mecca, the Kaaba, and the black stone. As regards the black stone, here's a quotation, a couple of quotations. The black stone will come forth on the day of resurrection and will testify in favour of those who touched it in truth. So if you go to Mecca, and you need to be a Muslim, by the way, otherwise you'll be beheaded prematurely. You walk around the Kaaba several times, hundreds of thousands do. It's quite fascinating to look at. And ideally, you can reach out and touch this black stone. So carrying on, it was narrated that Ibn Abbas, one of their earlier scholars, said, "The messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said concerning the stone, by Allah, Allah will bring it forth on the day of resurrection, and it will have 2 eyes with which it will see, and a tongue with which it will speak, and it will testify in favour of those who touched it in sincerity." Right? So basically, prophecy is that the black stone at some point, will actually speak. Right? So you have to wonder, speculating, whether the image of Mecca, the image of the Kaaba, will be possibly moved to Jerusalem, speculating again, and will speak. Right? We'll have to wait and see, won't we? But back to Revelation 13. So we've got this reference to you better worship the beast or his image. And of course, currently, I don't know if the Muslims who say they worship the black stone, I suspect they might not go quite that far. But in reality, if you're reaching out to kiss a stone, to touch it, and your belief is that if you can touch it, it will expiate your sins and give you a good run in the judgment, that's not far off worship, is it? Verses 16 through 18, he causes all, the beast, this second beast, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark, but not just the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So it's not compulsory necessarily to have the mark or only the mark, but you can't buy or sell. You're in serious economic trouble unless you have the mark or the name of the beast. What name's that? Or the number of his name. What would that be? Verse 18. Here is wisdom, which leaves nearly everybody sort of scratching their heads. Here's wisdom? What? Can't figure this out. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Right. And we all know what that means, right? Well, nobody's too sure exactly what that means, but my friend and I are going to do our best to cover off at least some of the options. Like I said last week, I think, and spent some time showing us, it's highly unlikely that anybody's going to take the mark of the beast inadvertently or accidentally. You can see people out there very worried. Oh, well, what if? And people have said, my credit card, the digits 666, is that the mark of the beast? Am I doomed to God's curses? The answer is no. Whenever you look at the mark of the beast, it's generally the mark of the beast, worship of the beast, worship of the image of the beast. It's a package, and it clearly points to people who are giving their allegiance in some form or fashion to the beast. They're giving their loyalty to the beast, not to God in heaven, not to Jehovah God, but to the Islamic Mahdi, to the false prophet Jesus, to Allah, who is the dragon, right? So there's a great deal of speculation as to what this is all about, this mark of the beast. And like I've said a number of times, as at today, you and I see darkly, right? But I've no doubt that if we're around when we get there, we'll say, that's it. That's it. I know the narrative, I know the words, I know the pictures, and I can see that there unquestionably is the mark of the beast, and I'm not taking it. But at the moment, we have to sort of try and figure out some of the options just to give us, a head start. And that might make it easier to identify when it comes along. So one of the most popular options is it's a microchip of some sort. It talks about you receive something in your forehead or something in your right hand that links you or identifies you as part of the beast, right? So the thinking here is that nowadays you can have a microchip inserted into your hand or into your head somewhere, which will contain a lot of important information about you. It will contain, or could contain at least, a complete record of your ID, who you are, your birth date, your address, perhaps your height, your eye color, your medical information. It may include a profile of your allegiances, that you're a Roman Catholic or you're a Presbyterian or you're a Church of God or you're a registered Democrat voter or you belong to the Masons or whatever, right? It could, of course, be linked electronically to your bank account, to your government social security system. If linked to your bank account, and if somebody doesn't like you any longer, they just switch it off. You can no longer access your money, right? Which means, of course, you can't buy and sell because this ties into who you are, and now you're a non-person. You've been cancelled, but you might still be there in the flesh. But you go up to a bank, a teller, or you go to a shop, Walmart's, wherever you shop, right? And you put your arm out for your microchip to be read and authorize your withdrawal of $100 or the week's groceries, and it says, sorry, you've been banned, you're cancelled. You can try and travel, can't get gasoline, right? Can't buy a railway ticket, an airplane ticket, right? So it's certainly possible nowadays. I mean, if you look back 50 years ago, 100 years ago, this was impossible. There's no way you could actually identify people electronically, but in the last few decades it's become easier and easier. I think we've got one slide just to sort of show in part, as I think on the right hand picture there, a little tiny thing but the size of a piece of rice is a microchip. The left hand shows you somebody having it injected into them. Right, easy to do nowadays, and you could argue in the last couple of years, or the last 12 months perhaps, with the mandatory, vaccine program. Vaccines are not going to be the mark of the beast, right? Because there's no allegiance there to an anti-God, to an Islamic Mahdi or anything. But you can look at it and think, you know what? As a process, that's quite a forerunner, because we've now had, I think, billions of people have had a syringe stuck in them and something injected into their bodies. That's billions of people. I've seen photographs this morning in the Telegraph of little tiny villages up in, I think, the Himalayas or the Kashmir mountains or somewhere. A little village with goats and sheep outside, snow everywhere, and visiting doctors and nurses and making their way high up into the mountains to make sure they inject even old ladies and old men up in the mountains, hundreds of miles from anywhere, right? So the process of getting to billions of people with a syringe already is there. And of course, we've all, I think, experienced something of the type of pressure that exists, mandated vaccines. Otherwise, you get no job. Otherwise, you can't go to school or university. Otherwise, you can't travel out of state. You can't catch an airplane. Well, a lot of things, and it's mandatory. And you've seen the pressure. Maybe some of you experienced the pressure. Oh, my word. If I want to carry on working and earning a living, I need to get one of these, right? So although the vaccine program is nowhere a mark of the beast, the mechanics, the process, the pressure, you can see is a pretty good forerunner, right? So I think we'd have to watch that one. If the Islamic Mahdi decides that he wants all of his followers to be identified by some super electronic means, it's not impossible, right? I don't know how likely it is, but it's no longer an impossibility. It could be done. So that's option number one. Option number two is one that's more familiar if you're a Church of God person. And the Churches of God, and overlapping with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, quite a big church, Seventh-day Adventists claim to have about 20 million members in countries all around the world, so quite a big group. But from their early beginnings in the 1800s, mid-1800s, they and latterly the Churches of God took the view that almost certainly the mark of the beast would be enforced Sunday worship, martyring Sabbath keepers. That was sort of the early thinking of Ellen G. White back in the 1800s, and the Seventh-day Adventists pretty much since then. And that's based upon Exodus. If we want to turn to Exodus 31, Exodus chapter 31, which talks about a godly sign to which was being held up, if you like. The mark of the beast would be the opposite of the sign of God. That was sort of the logic. So Exodus 31, let's read verses 12 through 17. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep. For it, the keeping, is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. So keeping the Sabbaths, says God, is a sign. It identifies me to you. It identifies you to me. Sabbath keeping. Verse 14, You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. Work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. It's quite serious in God's eyes. Therefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So the thinking here, was, and you can see where it comes from, the Sabbath is a sign. It identifies God's people to him. It identifies God to his people. It's a sign, special sign. And yet we're talking here about, you could use the words, a sign of the beast, right? So if the sign of God is keeping the Sabbath day, perhaps a sign of the beast is keeping a different day. And that's sort of where the logic came. And the question of the mind, the forehead and the right hand. Forehead is your intellect, your mind, where you think, where your allegiance is, and your right hand is pictures, doing work. So if on the Sabbath day you're resting from work, you're not using your right hand, and your mind is attuned and aligned to God in heaven, that's the forehead and the hand part, right? And as far as Ellen G. White was concerned, and the Seventh-day Adventists of the mid to late 1800s, the second beast of Revelation 13 was the United States government. So she saw the Protestant churches of America, quite a lot of them, tens of millions of churchgoers in America, born-again sorts and so on, would hate the Sabbath, and Protestant churchgoers in America would want to eradicate the Sabbath and have everybody keep Sundays, and they would enlist the power of the US government to enforce Sunday-keeping laws. So that's where Ellen G. White came up with the idea that the mark of the beast, and the beast as far as she's concerned is the Roman Catholic Church and all the rest of it, is mandatory Sunday keeping. And anybody who wants to keep Saturdays would be eliminated by the US government, right? And most churches of God since those days have gone down that sort of route, often seeing Sunday keeping as the mark of the beast. I can't personally see it being mandated, I've got to say, but that was sort of the thinking. But of course, the underlying premise to all of that was that the first beast was conceived to be the Roman Empire, or a resurrected Roman Empire, and the second beast is enforcing Sundays which is where the first beast had produced the idea of Sunday worship. So to think it was the second beast is probably the papacy or the Vatican working with the Roman resurrected empire in Europe to enforce Sunday keeping and eradicate and stamp out Sabbath days, right? If you look at more recent articles from Churches of God, you tend to find that the writers now are pulling back a bit on that. They're a bit more cautious. Most of them don't admit they don't know what the mark of the beast really is. They might occasionally mention Sabbaths and Sundays, but it's perceived as a possibility, but not perhaps a strong possibility. So that's where we are there, and I'd have to say, if you accept as I do, that the first and second beasts are Islamic, then Sunday worship, mandatory, doesn't really fit, right?
They keep Friday, yeah.
I mean, they keep Friday, of course. Maybe they want to enforce Friday worship, right? But I think it's highly unlikely to be the Sabbath keeping, Sunday keeping debate the Churches of God have in the past. But if we're talking of an Islamic beast and an Islamic false prophet, there's another idea that's caught on the last 10 years or so, which quite speculative. And at root of this idea is that the mark of the beast and worshipping the beast and having the name of the beast is all part and parcel of an individual who chooses to align himself or herself with Allah and with the Mahdi, right, the Islamic beast. So we're talking here about people take the mark, obviously under some pressure perhaps for buying and selling purposes, but they take the mark as part of showing their allegiance to the beast because you want to be part of the beast empire. You take the mark to show your willingness, your submission to the beast empire. The name Islam means submission, by the way. Okay? So you take the mark just to show that you're perfectly aligned. You're happy to join in with Islam and the worship of Allah and the respect for his servant Muhammad. You're happy to align yourself to the Mahdi and to Jesus, the prophet in the end times, right? So when we think of that, let's read verse 18 again and have a look at the 666 business. So verse 18, chapter 13. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Of course, that leads to all sorts of other speculation, but you probably understand that in many languages, particularly some older languages, the letters of the alphabet are often used in exchange for numbers. And we've got Arabic numbers, strange enough, 1, 2, 3, that sort of stuff. But many other languages in the past, they use certain of the letters of their alphabet to represent numbers. You're probably familiar with Latin. I would guess most of us can get by in some sort of Latin numbers where the letter X, which is an alphabet letter, X is 10. And you get V, which is 5. So X and a V is 15 in Latin. Well, other languages do the same, in particular Hebrew does it, and especially Greek. And of course, the New Testament, chapter 13, verse 18, is written in Greek, right? So you can find Greek alphabet letters which signify numbers. Now, people are aware of that, and they've often gone off looking for the names of people and tried to calculate them, sometimes in English, which doesn't really work. But sometimes they've used Latin. Well, Latin's an old church language. Or they've used Greek to try and figure out, whose name comes to 666. And there's tons of names do if you work them all out. Like President Ronald Reagan. Now, some people said his name, depending whether he had his middle name in or put the president there or drop president off, put Mr. You can play around a bit. But yeah, President Ronald Reagan, his name comes to 666. Obama, Mr. Barack Obama, his name comes to 666, depending on how much of it you use and so on. Prince Charles, here in the UK, his name apparently comes to 666, one of the titles of the Pope. He's got a number of titles, Vicar of the Son of God in Latin, I think it is, comes to 666. So must be the Pope, right? Bill Clinton, whether you use his entire name, his name comes to 600. So he must be, right, the man here, Bill Clinton. If you said Hillary, I'd probably believe you. But we're talking of Greek here. So all of these ideas based upon Latin or English, not the case. Latin. And Latin, Greek.
Greek Bible.
The Greek for 666 is, we'll have a picture of it in a moment or two, but not immediately, is 3 Greek letters, chi, psi, stigma. You'll see them in a minute. And they come to 666. So 3 Greek letters gives you 666. Now the thinking, the speculative thinking, is that what if the Apostle John in his vision didn't actually see 3 common Greek letters? What if he saw 3 symbols on the millions of followers of the beast? So in John in vision, he sees the beast, sees the empire, sees all the armies, the soldiers, the fighting, and John sees all over them 3 symbols, which to John look like 3 Greek letters. And John perhaps even just draws them accurately the way they appeared to him. But of course, subsequent copyists of the scriptures just think, oh, it's not very well done. I'll just tart it up, make it look proper. So they replace perhaps John's 3 carefully drawn symbols with 3 very similar characters from the Greek alphabet, right? That's the thinking, right? And it so happens that millions of jihadists do have 3 symbols on many of their garments, like the what do you call them, the apron things they have around their head. It's not called aprons, are they? The things they tie around their head. Bandanas. Is that the right word?
Headbands.
Headbands or bandanas they have around their head, and other places these 3 symbols appear, which look like the 3 Greek characters from which we get 666, right? So here's the slide, the first slide. So at the top, you've got 3 Greek letters that give you 666. Chi, psi, and stigma, from left to right. And that comes to 600. And then the middle one is 60. The one on the far right, the little dot by it, is 666. At the bottom, you've got an Arabic sign, which you can see looks very similar, the right and the left. And if you just twiddle the middle bit around slightly, it's odd. But the bit at the bottom, the 2 right-hand symbols, one it says there, in the name of, and the one in the middle looks like a snake, is Allah. So in Arabic you read from right towards left, opposite the way we do. So that is in the name of Allah. Then the left-hand side of the box there, you've got what appear to be crossed swords, which is a well-known symbol of Islam and its ultimate victory over the forces of evil. That would be you and me. So strangely enough, you think, well, you know what, there's not a big difference there. It'd be quite easy for some copyist rewriting the book of Revelation in later years, later decades, to think, oh, somebody's not quite right, I'll just change that. And it goes from what the Apostle John may have written to become the 3 characters that give you 666. So they're not identical, right? So hold that thought for a moment or two. Let's go back to verse 18 of Revelation 13. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate, or the King James says count. I think here count might be a slightly better usage of the word. Let him who has understanding count the number of the beast. Well, the word number there is the Greek word arithmos, A-R-I-T-H-M-O-S, arithmos. We get obviously arithmetic from it. And if you look at the lexicons, the Greek lexicons, arithmos means number, comma, or multitude. So a number could be the number 5 or 11 or 22, or it can simply mean a multitude, a big grouping of people, right? A multitude. And then we've got, after that, for it is a number or multitude That's exactly a perfect translation. Can be number, as in 11, or it can be a multitude. For it is a number of a man. Well, if you're looking at Islam, if we take that theme, which I think is right, who's the most important man in Islam? Who's the most important man to 1.8 billion Muslims? Muhammad, right? In fact, Muhammad is one of the most popular names in Britain, strangely enough, because of all the young Muslim boys, who are born in this country. Muhammad is one of the key names, right? And I guess that's worldwide as well. There are oodles of Muhammads, and for many people over the centuries, people didn't refer to them as Muslims; they referred to them as Mohammedans, right? That's still quite common. You talk of the Mohammedans, the Mohammedan people. In other words, the people are named after the man, Muhammad, right? So what happens if you take verse 18 and you switch the word number for multitude, which is exactly what it means. It's got two meanings, number and multitude. What happens if you take out the man as a sort of anonymous man and put in the man, Muhammad, and then you swap 666 to what we just covered in the name of Allah with the crossed swords of Islam, then this is what you get, verse 18. But, right, here is wisdom. Let him who understands count the multitude of the beast, for it is the multitude of Muhammad. His multitude is or comes in the name of Allah. That's actually a reasonable interpretation of verse 18. I'll read that again. Let him who understands count the multitude of the beast of this Islamic Empire, the multitude, the huge numbers. For it is the multitude of a man, Muhammad. His multitude is or comes in the name of Allah. Right? So that's quite curious. Now, it is a speculative option, but you don't have to work too hard to get to that. And it would, of course, be very consistent with everything else we've looked at. And today, and perhaps more so in the years ahead of us, many Islamic jihadists carry this mark, the Bismillah they call it, in the name of Allah. Bismillah. Right? They carry those signs, those symbols on many of their garments, not just as a physical symbol, which of course it is, but also it symbolizes their submission to Allah and His Prophet. It demonstrates their allegiance to Islam, to Allah, and to Muhammad, and it will in the future, of course, demonstrate their total allegiance to the Mahdi. And on the Mahdi's instructions and orders, they'll go out and they'll kill, they'll behead because they are fanatics, fanatical jihadists, right? And I think we've got another slide we can show you here. It's not very easy to see necessarily, but you can see, I think top left there's a bandana or a headband, and a few other places you can see there. These guys, you've seen them on TV, I'm sure. They wear garments like headbands and shirts and so on. And to you and me, it looks like just a sort of scroll, but that's Arabic writing. And among all of that, you often see the Bismillah, the in the name of Allah sign that they have, right?
Hamas headbands.
Hamas headbands. My wife is saying, yeah, people like that. So there's no way you can be dogmatic, right? But it's very consistent that the jihadists, and I'm trying to think ahead now, what you see today is in part. But in the fullness of time, as these prophecies get closer and closer, and if we see eventually what Islam calls its Mahdi, you and I think Antichrist, for opposite sides there, and if that Mahdi is taking action to spread Islam around the world and bring peace and equity to the whole world, provided you give up being a Christian or a Jew, right? Then it won't be surprising, to me at least, to find that many jihadists will be carrying clear signs of them, of that three symbols there. But, time will tell. So that pretty much concludes Inset Chapters 12 and 13. But having done those, let's just quickly overlap them on the seals of Revelation 6 and see how they fit together really quite neatly. So if you turn back to Revelation 6, we'll just sort of superimpose or at least add the insights to the seals. The seals, of course, are the story flow, or at least the first 6 events in the story flow. Pretty brief, so it doesn't tell you an awful lot as you go through the seals, which is why the inset chapters are so useful. They give us additional insights, perspective, a great deal of additional information. Chapters 12 and 13, there's quite a lot there, right? So let's just, like I say, read these first 6 seals and just see how they fit together. So Revelation 6, verses 1 and 2. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer, or better, overcoming and to overcome. Rider on a white horse, right? We said before, that's going to be a great deceiver. The first warning Jesus gave in Matthew 24, take heed that no man deceive you. Guess what? As far as Muslims are concerned, this is the Mahdi. We saw the picture earlier, and the quotation from Islamic sources. They actually say the white horse in Revelation chapter 6 is our hero, the Mahdi. Right? Verses 3 and 4. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, or the land, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. I expect in the early years of the Mahdi to be wars and skirmishes, not the major ones, I think they come a bit later, but certainly early on there'll be signs of violence, signs of oppression and skirmishing. Verses 5 and 6, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse. He who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius." A denarius is a day's wage in those days, so it implies you need a day's wage to get perhaps a loaf of bread. So there's pictures, economic shortages and woes. And 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. Because after wars and skirmishes, you often do get bottlenecks, supply chain shortages. We've seen some of that recently, right? And it can lead to empty shelves, Mr. Biden, right? Verses 7 and 8. When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, "Come and see." Now, the 4th seal of 7 seals comes, I believe, in the 4th year of the final 7 years. By the way, the Mahdi reigns 7 years, according to Muslims. So at the 4th year of 7, you're at the midpoint. What happens at the midpoint? The abomination of desolation is set up. Those in Judea, Jesus says, should flee to the mountains, perhaps Kadesh Barnea, right? So that's the midpoint. So this horse here coincides with the midpoint, the abomination of desolation, the beginning of the great tribulation. Let's carry on reading. Verse 8. So I looked, and behold, a green horse. Thank you, Mr. Tyndale, one of the few people that got it right. A green horse, although HORSSE, a green horsey. And the name of him who sat on it was Death. Ooh, that's an interesting name to have. And Hades, or the grave, followed with him, and power was given to them over 1/4 of the earth, or region, take your pick, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, or modern translations put with plague or pestilence, and by the beasts of the earth. So this particular green horse pictures the great tribulation at the midpoint. The abomination of desolation is now on the scene, and 1/4 of the earth, potentially, up to 1/4 of the entire earth, potentially, is going to die with sword, war with hunger, starvation with death, pestilence, disease, right? And by the beasts of the earth. Now, interesting the structure of that verse there, because if you notice it says, kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, but it doesn't say with the beasts of the earth. It says by, or it can be under the authority of the beasts of the earth. Well, who are the beasts of the earth? Well, throughout the rest of Revelation, the beasts are the beast, the false prophet. Those are the beasts of the earth. So that could be translated verse 8. I'll speculate slightly, but translation's fair translation. Power is given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with pestilence, by or under the authority of the beasts of the earth. So just possible that the beasts are using these tools, war and hunger and disease, maybe China flu. Verses 9 to 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held, commandment-keepers. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. Now, we don't know who's doing it here, but chapter 12 and 13 tells us, right? It's the dragon empowering two Islamic beasts. That's who's doing it, right? And that's the big plus of reading the Inset Chapters. And of course, if you think of Islam, you tend to think of beheading. And Revelation 20 tells us those who were beheaded for the word of God and for their testimony. Very, very consistent, I think. Then the sixth seal we won't read. It's the heavenly signs, right? Heavenly signs, two things happens, same day. The trumpets arrive to initiate God's wrath, and Jesus comes back in the clouds to collect and catch up his saints and take them off through the open door into heaven, all right? So hopefully, when you've looked at the Inset Chapters, at least 12 and 13, and you overlay them on the seals, makes perfect, consistent, harmonious sense. Well, it does to me at least. Okay, that's us finished for today.